Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So my name is Anthony Cruz. I am one of the deputy chairs. I'm the deputy chair for Precinct 4. And I'm going to be doing a presentation of why I am against Proposition B. Um, so let's let's start with something y'all might have probably seen the past couple days. Um, one of the one of my personal Facebook posts was sent to a reporter. Um, Y'all have all seen it. I'm excited to be applying to the mayor's office. Um, so I don't know who sent it, but I will say that this campaign has been this this campaign season has just been very different, very odd. Because what we're essentially voting on are some funds for a stadium. That's what Proposition B does. It's a yes vote says that um, Bear County will raise $311 million to help pay for a new Spurs stadium downtown. Um, my opposition to Proposition B is actually because of transparency. So the plans were actually created back in 2022. At least the negotiations began, but they were completely secret, behind closed doors. Everyone signed NDAs. No members of the community were allowed to join in. Um, and the first time we would actually hear about it wouldn't be until 2024, about in August when the Express News reported upon it. Um, and then it was all, by that time, the plan was basically complete. So then what we saw since are about 10 or 20 um, public input sessions on the already completed plan that is essentially them saying, we are going to, this is the plan we have, you're going to vote on it, and that's it. Um, what has been done in the past, back in 2008, is that the county created a um, community board basically to detail what we want this money spent on. So, for example, from the 2008 vote, which all passed, by the way, we got the museum reach, the new natatorium on the north side. We got soccer fields. We got so many great venues, which, according to the chapter 334, this money can be used for as well. Um, and so what a lot of folks are trying to do by saying we oppose Proposition B isn't to say we oppose Project Marvel in total. It's we want a voice in the process. But there's another thing too. Um, you see, the Spurs aren't our Spurs anymore, at least not totally. They haven't been locally owned completely since about 2021. Since then, the group, two big billionaires have taken ownership. Peter Holt has a minority stake and is still the CEO. One is James Liniger, part of the Texas Public Policy Foundation. You might know him as one of the advisors for Project 2025. The other big billionaire is Joe Gebbia, the former CEO of Airbnb, and also was an active member in Doge. For those of us who know federal employees, who may have been federal employees, we know the damage that Doge has done. And so the Spurs, by essentially trying to force this plan upon us, is essentially saying you're going to vote yes on this, even though two of our owners are actively trying to dismantle the United States. And so Prop B itself, there is one truth that the Yes campaign is saying. Prop B will not raise your taxes. That is absolutely true. But what happens after Prop B will. So one of the things that isn't really talked about are the bonds, the infrastructure bonds, which could be up to $250 million. The infrastructure bond, by the way, the crowning achievement of that is a 1,250 space parking garage. Um, and so this, instead of transit improvements, instead of renovations to the Amtrak station, we're getting a parking garage. And also, actually, I have an incorrect number here. It says $100 million to move the saws plant. That estimate has now increased to $200 million. That money may have to come from the general fund. That is your tax money. That is funds that fund our EMS system, fire department, infrastructure, parks, everything. $200 million of that from a budget that is already facing a deficit has to go to moving the sauce plant. So why does any of this matter when we're just talking about Prop B? If Prop B passes, the term sheet will essentially go into effect, because the term sheet states that if the county votes on this and says yes, they're taking that as consent to move forward. And then in 15 years, the term sheet states that there will have to be a $600 million, that's on the high end, might be higher, 15 years later, renovation, with how it's supposed to be paid to be determined. That could be our tax money. $600 million. Imagine what we could do with those funds instead of renovating a stadium. And you can't say that this is stuff that can only that 600 million can only be used for tourism. That's going to come from our property taxes, our sales tax. And regarding the bonds themselves, per the city of San Antonio, we only have $500 million a bond limit. If we're using 250 million for the infrastructure, and we can all agree that infrastructure is very important and it's a large capital purchase. If we're using 250 million of that to build a parking garage and maybe a couple new off ramps on 281, that leaves 250 million, half, for everything else. I was part of the 2022 bond campaign. We had 100 million for affordable housing. 100 million. If Prop B passes and we have to do an infrastructure bond for this thing, we're going to have we're not going to put $100 million towards affordable housing. We're going to put significantly less. But now look at see what we'll lose if we lose the maximum amount of bonds we have, bond limit we have. The parks, we're not going to be able to build. The sidewalk improvements, we're not going to be able to do. There's so much not being talked about, because a lot of what Prop B is, a lot of what the Prop B campaign is doing is saying, don't look behind the curtain. Just look at right now. Prop B is not going to raise your taxes. They're trying to make you look at one thing and not look at everything behind it. And one of the things I talked about with that infrastructure bond is pretty important to me. For those who don't know, I am actually wearing my SART shirt, my San Antonio Rail Transit shirt. Improving public transport is incredibly important for me personally. If we do not, for those, I live out between Converse and Kirby. I would love to take the bus to go to work. I can't, because it takes an hour. And instead of using funds to improve public transport, which so many of us have to use, especially those of us who can't drive or those of us who can't afford a car, we're essentially foregoing all those San Antonians for those that have a car. And there's one other thing too about public transportation. If you think traffic on 35 is bad now, what do you think is going to happen when 281 is backed up for a Shakira concert? What do you think is going to happen when 35 is backed up because of a Spurs game? And instead of it taking me 10 minutes to get downtown, it takes me 45 minutes to an hour. We're not thinking ahead here. Prop B is a boondoggle, not because it's a big handout, not just because it's a big handout to billionaires. It's a boondoggle because it's one shiny thing with no plans for what's going to come after. Just lots of promises. And these are some of the venue projects that were actually funded by the 2008 commission. Um, Everything from the Tobin Center itself to, I didn't realize this, but the Briscoe Museum. You know, so many things that we use were funded because the county said, okay, we're going to let the people have a voice. And guess what else was funded on that? Renovations to the SBC Center. So we can get a big stadium. I absolutely, you know what? I agree. We need, the Spurs would probably be better downtown. But using all this, using this plan that they have pushed out is essentially being forced upon us. And if anybody thinks it is democratic for a plan that was created behind closed doors to be forced upon us, let me know. Does anybody think that's democratic? Because it really feels like we're being forced into something with a gun to our heads. First, it was the Spurs are going to leave. The Spurs can't leave. They are here until 2032. Now we saw that if we don't use this money, it's going to go to Greg Abbott. That's also not true. We have this money until 2028. We can create a plan by 2028. We have time. We can do this. I oppose Proposition B not because I don't want Project Marvel to happen. I oppose Proposition B because the term sheet and plan they have right now is not good for San Antonio, and we can do so much better. We can look at ways to make San Antonio for everyone better. We can do so much more than one stadium and a concert venue at Hemisphere. And it's not an unreasonable ask. And I hope everybody considers it. I pushed a resolution in the CEC for the party to take a position on Project Marvel. It was not considered because it was viewed that it could risk our candidates. When the poll came out the day after that showed the majority of the county that a strong plurality of the county was against Proposition B, something struck me in the crosstabs. One of the groups that was most against it, extremely liberals and young people, 18 to 29s were against it by wide margins. We as a party are the party of the working class, the champions of workers, the champions of labor. We are not we are not the party of corporate handouts. We work with develop, we will work with business, and we should, but we don't give them something for nothing. And this is what I really want to end on. I talked a little bit about the screenshot of my post. What I really felt from that was violated. Because I was very excited about something, and because I took a stance against, moneyed interests, big interests, which included some prominent Democrats, I was attacked. My personal information was leaked and now is public. We are a better party than that. I believe that. We are better when we disagree openly and freely. We are better when we celebrate our differences. We are not better when we attack each other. Matt and I disagree on Proposition B, and that's okay. I respect him for that. I respect somebody who does his research, who talks, and has an open conversation. Ron Nirenberg is my mentor. He was the first candidate I ever worked for. We disagreed. I am asking everyone in this room to consider the words I said, to consider the data I presented, and to look at each other with honesty and curiosity. Let's come together, even when we disagree. And let's make everything we do for the people of San Antonio. Thanks. And those are my works cited. I will provide the presentation in the chat. You're more than welcome to ask any questions and to poke around in my citations. Thank you.
Thanks for presenting that, Anthony. Does anyone have any questions for Anthony, or just we have 10 minutes until our next speaker, so we can also have some discussion about maybe why other people are against Prop B and some of their concerns.
One thing I will add is that was a great presentation, Anthony. I do agree that we should be open to disagreement. I mean, it is a democracy, and I appreciate the people that support it as much as I appreciate the people that are voting against it, which that will be my position in this scenario. But I just want to add that, with the Democratic Party, I think that you made a really good point about us being the party that represents workers, everyday people, and people that are pursuing the American dream. And that should be the main force going forward for where we stand on critical issues like this. So thank you, Anthony.
Thanks, Sam. Mike?
Oh, just question. I guess because I feel like those in favor, because I'm against, but for other reasons too. But I was gonna say, I know you said we're the party of the working class, but what about those who feel like this is a deal for the working class, since they did say that we're going to be getting jobs and that it's going to be more jobs because a lot of people are going to be coming and they're going to need to hire people in the area. So like,
Sure.
and also too, like they said, yes, we're not going to pay for it, but if they say, well, the 200 million, that's just part of like what they usually do. And also, I'm just trying to see, like, I guess devil's advocate, like if
Sure.
we're the party of the working class, like, what about like the jobs that they did say that they're going to do, and that they're going to give us 75 million, and
Sure.
the lease for 4 million a year too. They're basically
So
going to say, well, we're paying for stuff, so it's not like y'all are not getting us.
sure. So let's start with the jobs. And let's start with jobs and economic development. This has been promised before. They promised it with the SBC Center. They promised it with the Alamo Dome. Henry Cisneros, who just put out an op-ed today, promised it with the Fiesta Entertainment District that was once called the Pink Elephant. That, by the way, is now the UTSA downtown campus. It got shut down and bulldozed almost, I think 5 years after it opened. And jobs, I mean, there are jobs at at stadiums. They're mostly minimum wage. They're mostly contract jobs. None of them are unionized. You know, the issue here isn't just, um, you know, are there jobs going to come? Yeah, there's some jobs that are going to come, but not many, and very few of them pay well. Um, and to the other question about what was the second one? It was about the 75 million. That's 75 million over 30 years. That's I think it was 4 million a year. And so for 311 plus 489, which is, someone do math on me, I think is near as damn at 900, almost $1 billion. We're getting 4 million back. Now, I want you to imagine that I'm selling you a car for 750 bucks, but I'm asking 10,000. It's completely disconnected there. And you know, I understand where folks who are think like that are coming from. But there needs to be more, but I recommend more thought into it. Especially given, again, the workers of the SBC Center, the Alamo Dome, and the like. Mr. Griffin? Start calling you Peter.
Nah, it's the first name, but so I initially heard the anti Proposition B side. I think you were at the meeting, whereas
Oh yeah.
for the different precinct chairs, and then later I went to one from the pro side, and then there was another precinct chair for my district on the pro side. That was like a virtual meeting, and then went to the Council District 6 town hall. And I think it's at that one that I really cemented my view, because hearing the initial against side and then the pro side in isolation, they felt like they were talking about different things. And it was unclear exactly where the truth was between those perspectives. And I didn't want to take a firm stance until I had that better understanding. But at the Council District 6, I initially thought it was framed from the pro side, and it kind of was, in the sense that one of the speakers was from the pro side, but one of the speakers was just working within the city, and they kind of had to cater a bit to it, but they weren't able to do the full pro side pitch. And I saw some of the areas where they didn't say certain things or said what was different to when it was just the pitch, where previously it had been told to me that the Spurs were in a binding agreement and that they had to
Mhm.
pay their half. They had to cover anything over cost that ran, and there was no way weaseling around it. But then the actual council hall, where both sides were present, and it was specifically said it's non-binding.
That is correct.
And I think that's where I started after the council hall or the town hall meeting itself. I talked with some of the people on both sides individually to fact check a few things, and I saw more where there were maybe some areas where the against Proposition B side was framed in a way that I could see as being misleading, but I saw a lot more on the pro Proposition B side that was actively. I don't think I could interpret it as anything other than
It's sketchy.
intentional misinformation. And I think that is where I really came down on the perspective, because I can see the positive aspects to the proposition, and I can see where, Project Marvel itself, if this is handled in the right way, they kind of bank a bit on this is just the plan. We still got a lot of wiggle room and whatnot, and it can be executed well. It could be executed poorly, and I'm not exactly. I'm not a augur or something. I can't tell you how it's going to
Sure.
play out, but the disingenuousness of how the pitch was presented, I think, really rubbed me the wrong way, and it
Yeah.
makes me trust them less that it will be executed in a manner that I would consider to be.
I see, yeah, I see where you're coming from. And that's, it goes back to talking about transparency. There's a significant lack of transparency here, from the very beginning. And whether it's by design or incompetence, regardless, it's not transparent. And one of the things I really appreciate is you talking about your journey from to learn and then coming to a conclusion. Um, and it is really important, that we really hammer out talking about our journeys as to where we come down on a policy idea or a candidate even. We need to talk about our truths. um I really really grateful, Griffin, that you told us, and you were willing to listen, and you came to your conclusion. What's up, Jason?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. I was wondering, you mentioned a lot about B, but I was wondering if we're also talking about A right now, and if you had any perspective on that, or if we're even talking about that right now. But if we are,
So
then I'm curious what you think.
I'm kind of neutral on A. I'm going to a another town hall this coming Tuesday. I can put the information in the chat. Um, that we'll be talking about both props. The big prop that everyone's really focused on is B, because it's the stadium. Like, the center of this is the stadium, and like Griffin said, there's just so much a huge lack of transparency and sleaziness going around that it's rubbed everyone the wrong way. And as we saw yesterday, polls came out against it. 46% of San Antonians would probably vote against it, compared to only 40% voting
Mike,
for it.
Mike,
Mikey.
did you have something to add to this discussion right now, or can it wait until after? Because we just had the next speaker in for
Oh, okay.
speaking for join
Oh, okay.
us.
I didn't know if
So
this was like all the things like against, or like we're gonna have a chance to discuss again.
yeah,
But
so I sent out the schedule,
oh, okay, never
and
mind.
basically we're gonna do 30 minutes against. So we just did the against, and then 30 minutes for. So that's why thank you, Andrew Solana, for joining us. Y'all have been busy, so I appreciate you hopping on. And then afterwards we'll have another hour I've allocated towards a full discussion. So whoever wants to stay on for that long, I will host the Zoom for that long. Thank
Thanks,
you,
Liz.
Andrew,
And
for joining us. Yeah.
is this gonna be posted somewhere, like on a
Yes, I'm
private
recording
YouTube
it, and
link
I
or
will.
something?
I'm recording it, and I'll put it on the Slack. And I'm
If I
Okay,
hop off,
thanks.
it's only
I'm
because
not
I've
sure
got the
about
SART
the
board meeting
YouTube
at the
thing.
same time. Um, but
Anthony, I'll be offended.
you're always
Um,
offended, Andrew.
Honestly, I feel like
By the way,
I
Andrew,
don't have
you
a
need to
problem.
answer my text about Stonewall. Are we? I'll text you in a bit.
Okay, thank you.
I don't have a problem with this going onto YouTube to be distributed for other people also to help make their decision, because I think that these conversations are good for everyone to like have more information. So I'm okay with it if the speakers are okay with it, for this to go onto
I'm
YouTube.
good with it.
Anthony,
Thank
before you
you.
hop off, is that cool? Okay,
Liz,
thanks,
that
Andrew.
reminds me, did we post the CEC?
Yeah, it got posted.
Okay, thank you.
Liz, sorry, is that my cue? I'm sorry. Yo,
Yeah,
okay.
sorry. I think
I
there was
saw your
overlap, but you're
face.
good to go.
Okay, I'm gonna try to go. I'm just leaving an event right now, so I'm gonna try to do this, um, and not look like super awkward in my car. But thank
I
y'all
have
again for the opportunity. Go ahead.
I have your slides if you want me to share them.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
So as Liz brings those up, I just want to hit a couple of top lines. I know this group, one you just heard from Anthony, but I would consider this group, already kind of has the basics down. But I think I want to leave plenty of time for questions and answers, and really just focus. Liz, if you want to go to the next slide here, on what this means, on what a yes vote means. Just to be clear, Prop A and Prop B, right? I know they're separate, but they are really contingent on one another. I think most importantly, the easiest thing to understand is that the rodeo's expansion, proposed expansion, which is the reason why they're on the ballot, can't really happen with the Spurs still there. And so that's a part of this. It's actually a big part of this. Think of it as two roommates who have outgrown the space that they're in together, and so that's a considerable amount. And so I just want to highlight that. Um, Expanded rodeo, new arena, and of course the jobs that come with that. So if you want to go to the next one here, Prop A again on the rodeo side, pretty straightforward, $191.8 million of the visitor tax, which includes the hotel, motel, and car rental, would go to expand that. So just to kind of give you a couple of numbers on the rodeo side, right now during the rodeo road trip, obviously they kicked the Spurs out for a month in February. And for 21 days, the rodeo contributes about $350 million worth of economic impact to the area. And so by doubling or tripling that amount and doing year-round activities, if you've ever had the opportunity to travel to Fort Worth area, the stockyards, that's what this would look like. So from 350 to 700 plus million worth of impact is a big deal. And so again, in order to expand, right now, I was just at an event where one of the rodeo officials was talking about almost every day they're getting calls trying to book competitions and bull riding and FFA and 4-H conventions that they have to say no to because it conflicts with the Spurs schedule. So that's what happens with Prop A. It really does kickstart a lot of the development at not just the Freeman and Frost, but the rodeo grounds. So going forward to the next slide on Prop B. Prop B is the remaining balance of those visitor tax. Over 30 years, it's anticipated to create over 500 million in economic impact. And so again, 192 to the rodeo, the remaining 311 would go to the arena. Important to point out the 311 amount, it's actually a percentage, right? And so it's the commitment from the county on their end of the 1.3 billion for the arena. It can't exceed 25% or 311 million, whatever comes first. And so because the Spurs, and you've probably heard this already, have guaranteed any cost overruns, any amount above the 311 and the 489 from the city, the Spurs will be on the hook for, not the visitors or the visitor tax or sales tax. You want to go to the next slide? Thank you. So this is that amount I just said, 1.3 billion. Of that, the Spurs are at 500 million. The remaining balance is out of that visitor tax for the county, which is what we're voting on in November. And on the city's 489, I just want to really quickly make sure that everybody understands that money is also not coming from property or sales tax. And so this is where I think the biggest confusion comes from, is that when I get to be on this call tonight or at a meeting and tell you that this is not being paid for by San Antonio or Bexar County taxpayers, what I mean is that our property taxes and sales taxes are not going up. A lot of people are familiar with the sales tax piece, right? Pre-K for SA was paid for with that. When you go to a restaurant, you get anything and you purchase it, that 1/8 of a cent is helping fund that. It's the same thing that helps fund VIA and linear creeks and trailways. That's not this. Same thing with property tax. The city hasn't actually increased property rates in over close to 30 years. This doesn't do that either. So when you go to the ballot and you've seen that says this is a tax increase, it's because it is a tax increase on visitors. It's going from 1.75 to 2%. So that 0.25% increase is what will go towards funding that 500 million between the city and the county. The county for Prop A and B. If you want to go to the next slide, Liz, on this slide, just really quickly, this is a total investment of 2.1 billion. And so this is the breakdown of that. The reason why it's 2.1 is the 500 plus cost overruns for just the arena. It's 1.4 billion in guaranteed property development for the property tax growth that will pay for the city's 489 portion. A considerable portion of that will be paid for guaranteed development. And of course, the 75 million doesn't even have to do with the arena. That's just in addition to one of the largest single investments by a professional team, certainly with the NBA alone. Oklahoma City Thunder, as an example, most recently, the taxpayers there are paying 95% of the new arena for the Thunder, and that is through sales tax. So they are actually increasing the sales tax there. So Oklahoma City residents will be paying for that. The Thunder as an organization only put 50 million towards the arena and no additional funds towards a community benefit agreement. The Spurs alone on the 75 million isn't even for the arena. That's just towards the city council will be able to determine how to use that money annually for a $2.5 million payment. So Liz, we can end there on the slides. I want to just two additional points before we can do questions. I want to make very, very clear and reiterate what I just said. This does not increase sales tax or property taxes. So here are the three categories of people who will pay for this. And I want to make sure we acknowledge, if you rent a hotel, motel room, or car, you will pay for this. So whether you're a visitor or local, I want to be clear. The vast majority, obviously, of that is going to be paid for by tourists who are coming to San Antonio. We're the top tourist destination in the state, one of the top destinations in the country. The vast majority of that. But I want to acknowledge that if you decide to do a staycation or you have to rent a car, that 5% on the car rental and the 0.25% increase, that is how this will get paid. The other portion is if you are going to develop in Hemisphere, the property, the increase in property taxes on that development will help to pay the 489 on the city's portion. That's the second category of people who are going to pay for this. And then the last one, of course, is if you're part of the Spurs ownership, you will pay for this because of that. So those are the three categories. No one else. The other thing I want to make sure we're clear on, and I think this is the biggest point of contention between me and Anthony, is, and also Cops Metro, I know, and others who, at this point, we're at meetings every night with each other. And so we're hearing it back and forth, is that this money cannot, by law, be used for anything other than the 9 categories of venues laid out by the state. Yes, there are projects that others have talked about in the past that they point to, river extension, Riverwalk extension, Spring, San Pedro Springs, soccer fields, and other fields. In 2008, those were paid for the common denominator there is that they increase tourism. The only way that you're able to use these funds for venues is if they put heads in beds. That's the easiest way to explain it. And heads in beds means, does it increase hotel night stays? So I've heard a lot about Wahilote Ranch, right? I think I agree with everyone on this call that Wahilote Ranch is not, shouldn't move forward. But to suggest that this money can be used for water protection for Wahilote Ranch is just not accurate. Maybe it's a misreading of the state law, but unless Wahilote Ranch is turned into some kind of tourist attraction that increases hotel night stays, it cannot be used for this. And furthermore, it's not just that we say this is going to be used for a project. You actually, as the county, has to submit once a year annually to the state comptroller proof that it increased hotel night stays and tourism, or they will not be reimbursed out of the account for this project. So it's not as simple as just saying, well, tourism impacts everything. We can just say it's tourism. It's not that easy. So I just want to clear up those two are the biggest misconceptions. And now, if you'd like, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Go for it, Jason.
Yeah, so Andrew, I just had a quick question, which is I don't think you have the benefit of being here for what Anthony was saying, but I think he kind of was conceding most of what you're talking about the kind of impact on taxpayers directly and that kind of thing. But he was saying, and if maybe somebody can correct me if this is wrong at all, but he was saying that the impact would be felt more through kind of like longer term impacts on the upcoming bond, which might be kind of depressed in its ability to fund some of those other things, water and whatever else that we want to fund because it would be needed to use to fund some other thing that's kind of like, related to this development or something like that. And I think that is what I mean. Also, if I'm misstating that, somebody can correct me.
I've heard Anthony talk about that, and I would say that you're right. So let me see if I can maybe clarify and answer that question. So let's just use one example I know right now that's out there is the water chiller plant, right? The Saws water chiller plant is the big nondescript building right next to the Denny's downtown, right in between the Denny's and the Hyatt, Grand Hyatt. That chiller plant provides cooling for large buildings downtown, right? Just to kind of set up what it is. Regular Saws ratepayers, all of us on the phone on the call tonight, do not pay for that, right? It's a separate bill if you are on the system. So the biggest ones are actually the city for both the convention center and the Alamo Dome. The Grand Hyatt and other hotels, River Center Mall, those big buildings, right? It's not your regular air conditioner, obviously. So they use water being chilled to cool those large spaces. Right now, that system needs to be upgraded regardless, right? We all know that Project Marvel is a larger development of which the arena, proposed Spurs arena, is just one piece of it. I guess what I would say bottom line is the type of development the city is looking at occurring for Project Marvel is a new hotel, expanding the convention center, the John Woods Pavilion, and et cetera, right? Y'all know what that looks like, the land bridge, the Alamo Dome, all that. That is going to mean that water chiller plant has to get upgraded, right? I want to say it's about 17,000 customers or so. I might have that number off. I'm happy to provide that to y'all later. But the point is, the Spurs Arena, Prop B, is not causing that water chiller plant to have to be upgraded or moved. The number one reason it actually has to be moved or is considering being moved is that the city in Project Marvel wants to put a hotel on that site. So Saws is like, we have to increase the water chiller, right? We have to build a bigger one to support all of the new development happening. The city wants to build a hotel here anyway, then let's just figure out how does that work. So that's why they're doing a feasibility study, but it is not because of the Spurs, nor would it be paid for or borne by the customers that are not using the water chiller. So I know that's a kind of complicated, longer answer, but again, just to highlight, we wouldn't pay that. That would likely be paid for by the actual people who use the water chiller, and it's actually, the city would actually pay less because more people would be on the system, so they would actually have to pay less of it. and two, it's happening regardless. The other one I would just say that talks about a lot is the bond. The bond, and some of you may sit on some of the bond committees. Every 5 years, the city puts out a new bond. The current bond we're on is from 2022. The city appoints citizens to sit on these bond committees, and they decide for each council district where to spend that money and make recommendations that council approves. We are in year 3 of that one, right? Because we're 2022 to 2025. If we were in normal circumstances, that bond would the next bond would happen in 2027, right? That's 5 years after 2022. So when you hear folks talk about, well, we only have 500 million right now if we were to do a bond now, think of it like this. If you use a credit card and you take out, and let's say just you max it out, of course your limit is going to be lower. Right now, we are in year 3 of a 5-year bond. And so if you go and ask, what is our bonding capacity right now? It's going to be less because we have a year and a half's worth of projects that still haven't been completed. Okay. Yes, it's also true that the economy is down and property taxes are down. That is what back up bonds. And so the bonding agencies are going to say, hey, you guys, you have a great credit rating, right? AAA bond rating, but your property rates are down, your revenues are down. So it's not going to be as much. Those are the two main reasons why that number 500 gets thrown around. I can assure you, if this bond in 2027, that number is going to go up because those projects would have been completed. So I guess the main point is it's lower, not because the Spurs arena, the infrastructure bonds that get talked about, the 250 million, that's for Project Marvel, again, of which the arena is one piece of it. But that will not take away necessarily. It doesn't mean that we're using half of our 500, because if the bond in 2027 happens when it's supposed to, that number will ultimately get increased. So I hope I answered that question as well.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Jordan was next.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So I thank you for sharing some of that information. I think that was insightful. I had heard something similar. I know the CEO of the rodeo was talking recently in an interview, a similar perspective on the inability to host additional events. And my question that I'm curious about is, why can't they host additional events? Yes, I understand the Spurs are there and they have games and things like that, but just even back of the envelope numbers, it's like less than a combined 100 days that the facility is occupied by both the rodeo and the Spurs currently. So to me, it's like it doesn't, that math ain't mathin'
Yeah.
on that. So I have a couple other questions, but that's just kind of where
Yeah.
my first question was.
No, that's a fair point. I think that the simplest answer is that your math is right on the actual days where they overlap. The rodeo, as an example, in February, when they set up in the Frost Center, it takes about 12 days for them to actually prepare it, right? We're talking about them having to remove the court and put it in dirt, a lot of dirt, actually. That all takes time. And so I guess maybe like we're used to probably thinking of it more like a concert coming in, right? It's very quick. A concert happens and everyone goes home. These rodeo events, whether it's bull riding, whether it's FHA or it's 4-H, all those type of programming, people are coming here for 3, 4, 5 days at a time, right? They're bringing their trailers in with animals, with livestock, and these are the type of events that we're talking about. And so it's not as simple as like the days the Spurs are traveling, because they may be gone for a day or two and they have to be back in the arena 3 days later. That's not going to work for a lot of these conventions and competitions.
Yeah, certainly. I was a 10-year 4-H member, state council member. I grew up in
Nice.
that world. I'm very, very aware of that. I did the national anthem at the San Antonio Livestock Show Rodeo years ago. But okay, but I guess the thought to that too is like, I where has that been attempted at this? Like, has that just, is it currently a thing that is contractually bound that they are unable to do because of those contract parameters? And if that is, or that's just, is there current like restrictions based on the contract parameters?
I think it's more so, my understanding is it's more of just when someone calls and says, hey, like these are the dates that we're looking at wanting to do. I just heard a gentleman at a meeting I was at from the rodeo say they had a live cattle competition or auction that was going to take place and that they had to tell them no. So again, and this is my limited understanding on the rodeos piece. I'm happy to get that info, and you sound like you probably know more, but like he said, we told him no because those dates conflicted. And so I really just think, I don't know if it's necessarily contractual other than if the Spurs are playing, there's like a day or two, whatever it looks like, that you can't be there for setup time. But I think, and it's not just that they're going to be in the Frost Center, right? It's also on the grounds. And so it's hard when you're having those events, not just at the Freeman, but there's all those big buildings in the back. There's going to be 2 new additional ones that are built to have that capacity. So it's not just the Frost, right? It's also the Freeman and the grounds. And so that's what I understand from the rodeo is that in order to grow, and it's not just 100 days for them, it's also a year-round activation like the Fort Worth Stockyards, right? So I've never been to the Fort Worth Stockyards, but I understand from doing research about the type of activities they have year-round.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And then not to capitalize on time, I guess my question is around when it comes to the idea that no, obviously taxes are not increasing because of the hotel occupancy and those types of revenue streams, but I guess what is the analysis, or do you have any information on what the analysis has been around as kind of like the trickle down impacts of this investment? I mean, so I moved here from Austin because as a teacher I can't afford to buy in Austin, so I was like, heck yeah, let's go to San Antonio. That's closer to home. And
Yeah.
and I'm able to buy here. I'm actually living in Denver Heights. So for me, I bought in this area because thinking, heck yeah, Project Marble might be a great thing. Helps me. Um, my property value will go up because of the surrounding investment, which then has the interned impact of also my taxes going up. So I'm
Yeah.
curious to know, because I ran some curious as far as back and forth prior to the development of the Alamo Dome, what taxes and values were before and after, what rents were before and after, and there was huge increases.
Yeah.
Similarly, whenever we did the Frost Center, that was the same basic model that kind of transpired. So I'm curious to know what the economic impact is in the area as far as heck yeah, revenue and increased evaluation of my asset, but also taxes and things like that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think overall the economic impact, you can look at it a couple of different ways, but I think the reports that have been referenced for like Project Marvel alone, and I want to point this out because it's a good point that I think doesn't get talked about enough. I know there's a lot of talk about the economic impact study and being independent, and it may not make a difference to people, but I just want to be clear. The city, as I understand it, when they hired CSL, who is one of the foremost experts in this type of studies, they understood or were made aware that their ownership group, that there would have been a conflict of interest to include the Spurs Arena in the study, because again, the Spurs Arena is one piece of Project Marvel. So they actually asked them, don't include that in your model, right? Like, because that would be a conflict. And so the CSL study is really looking at Project Marvel as a whole, and then they didn't look at the arena. The Spurs did their own study, the Stone Report, as it's often referred to, and the top line numbers there were looked at in the overall study and said, okay, look, we agree with your premise and the numbers that you've come out with. So again, it may be a distinction without a difference, but I just want to be clear. CSL didn't actually include the arena when they did their study. But all that to say, the economic impact estimated is at 19 billion, and that's 300 million to the general fund. And so in terms of like, yes, we understand it sounds like we're not paying for this, but still, like, what are we going to do? Because I think everyone on this call, I would assume, understands and acknowledges like we need more money to come in to the coffers of the city's general and the county's general fund to pay for things like more roads and streets and sidewalks and drainage and all the programs that we want to fund out of the general fund. Absent these type of projects, I guess and it's not rhetorical, but the question is, what do we do, right? Like, these are the type of economic development deals. And I heard someone talking about this earlier. The Spurs employ 500 employees, which doesn't sound like a lot, but full-time employees at the Frost Center, another 1,000 part-time seasonal employees. That's about 1,500 total. If this were anybody but the Spurs, like the city, the county, the economic development groups would be doing everything they can to make sure that we bolster that, right? And that's what this type of investment does. And so I don't like the word trickle down. Look, I am not a Reagan guy, obviously. I don't believe in that. But I will say in this regard, it's different because we're not paying for it. It's using the visitor tax to inject $2.1 billion of development into our downtown that we can then use to spur growth, right? So that's number one. Number two, I actually presented at Denver Heights and Dignity Hill and Lavaca. I would consider those being the three largest neighborhoods that are going to be impacted by this, right? Lavaca, like literally being on the same street as Hemisphere, right, with Cesar Chavez. And so I think everyone is aware of that. I think that's something the city and the county are going to have to be, and I understand they are cognizant of, on how property tax and gentrification and trying to do everything they can to avoid that. There is no actual displacement on the property, unlike what happened with the baseball stadium, where Soapworks, and we all know about that and what happened. Those individuals are actually being displaced. Here, there is no displacement, right? There is nothing other than the ITC, which has now been demolished. There is nothing on that site, right? And there's no housing being torn down or anything like that. But there is other types of displacement that could happen by property taxes going up, I think, to your point. And so I have heard, and this is not the Spurs, this is not me from the Spurs talking, but I do know in the past when I worked at City Hall, there were conversations amongst a lot of us about how do we inoculate some of these people who are either seniors or low income from seeing big jumps. And I don't know if it's a freeze. I don't know if that's extending homestead exemptions. But I do think, I know Representative Diego Bernal has been really pushing for this. And so I think the city and the county are going to have to be creative. I don't think anyone's under the illusion that this is not going to create some pressures on people, and trying to do everything that they can to figure that piece out. So I hope that answered your question. Somewhat, you're giving me a I'd love to talk with you more about it, because it sounds like you've done a lot of homework, and I'd be interested to see what that looks like. I know people like Velocity Texas and LISC and others have been coming together, and Sage have come together trying to figure out and put together some kind of comprehensive plan for the Near East Side, which includes Dignity and Denver Heights. And so if you haven't taken a look at that, I think you should get involved. I got a briefing the other day from them, and they're really looking at these type of issues that you're talking about.
Matthew?
Thanks, Jordan.
Okay, hey Andrew. So
Hey, Matt.
I wanted to ask. I'm glad you mentioned your City Hall experience, because that's sort of what I wanted to touch on. So I know one of the major criticisms of Project Marvel and the props and everything is that it was kind of done behind closed doors, and how they had to sign NDAs, and how there was that leak a few years ago that Manny put out. And I think you said you worked for Manny before, right?
Hey, don't hold that against me. Don't be putting that out there. Yes, I was Manny's policy director.
No, I'm not saying but I'm just wondering if you could pull the curtain back on that, because I know Anthony said that with the bond in 2008 and other past projects like this, the city has opened it up to the public for comment, for development, for refinement of these things. So, to your knowledge, why was this one different?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say it's necessarily different, right? I think there's more of a spotlight on this one. Look, I think in reality, most people understand that there's a certain level of negotiations that have to happen early on without, being publicly disclosed, because it's real estate, right? There's a lot of speculation that goes into this, and if someone finds out that the city or the Spurs or someone is looking at a piece of property then they're likely going to try to increase the price of that, right? Like that's just how that works. That's not to say that things should be done in secret. I do think at all points there should be more transparency. And full disclosure, I was Sukkor's chief of staff when she first got elected, and this is something I was pushing for as I was hearing it through the grapevines that like there were conversations happening. We now know because of reporting and because people like Eric Walsh and others have talked about it, and so has Mayor Nirenberg, that the city actually approached the Spurs about coming and anchoring, having the arena in Hemisphere to anchor Project Marvel. And so I think that's important to note as well. I was hearing at a meeting Bobby Perez from the Spurs talk about the conversations that they were having already with the rodeo have been going back 5 years about just like what does that growth look like, right? If the rodeo needs to expand and the Spurs, need to either put money into the Frost Center or to move, and then that's when the city approached them and said, look, we should have that conversation because if you guys aren't going to be playing there past 2032, and that's around the time we're going to be doing Project Marvel, then that makes sense. So that's how that happened. I do know that after that in November of 24, so almost a year ago, is when the first public conversations were happening where council was briefed. And then since then, a lot of you, I think, probably participated or saw the community's outreach over the summer, right? So there were a bunch of meetings that were held. I have been attending a ton of meetings now after the term sheet was passed. So from August 21st until now, trying to get the word out. And so, listen, I'm an organizer at heart. You're not going to ever hear from me that we did enough. I wasn't at the city at the time when that happened, but I can share with you my own thoughts. I thought the city could have done a better job on the type of meetings that they were doing. But at the end of the day, there was public outreach that happened. Of course, transparency is a big deal and we need to always do more. But I do think that there was a lot that was done. And lastly, really, really important that people understand November 4th is not the end all be all, right? This came up last night. I was at Councilman Munguia's town hall and I was there literally having to go after Sister Slater from Cops Metro, which is not an easy feat. It's hard to say to the nun that I disagree with her. But at the end of the day, my point is that when people think that already that too much was done behind closed doors, right? Then we also hear the complaint of, well, this deal the term sheet, right? It's not finalized, and it's a really kind of delicate balance between that, because on one side, if all that had been done and finalized and the deal was already done, then everybody would have hollered about, well, how come all that was done behind closed doors? And on the other side, you still have people saying, well, how come it's non-binding, right? The Spurs can still get out of it. So it feels like it was done. The council was cognizant of that and did just enough in the term sheet to say, hey, when voters go to the polls in November, you at least know that these are what the Spurs, the city, and the county are going to be putting into this and from where. All the other stuff is going to have to take place after November, right? You can't have robust community discussions about what the thing's actually going to look like and how it's going to impact people before the citizens have voted on it, right? So it really is a catch-22, and I think there's no good way to do it. I think you're going to make people upset on both sides. But in my view, that's kind of the tale of a good deal is when if one side's really happy with you and the other side's not, then it's probably wasn't done fairly.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Gabe, you're next. Also, sorry, just pause. Andrew, how long do we have you for? Because I'm holding the Zoom until 9, but I just want to make sure that I'm
sitting in my car in a parking garage, so I'm with you guys until you don't have any more questions.
Okay, that's really generous. Thank you.
Yeah, so just a pretty straightforward question. Given how tightly the plans are between these two bonds, what happens if one passes and the other one fails? As unlikely as that is.
Yeah, you mean in terms of like I think the best or
like
the most common
B fails.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, look, there is no plan B, right? Like I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not aware of any type of plan B or anything. And so I think everyone's just focused on this thing passing. If I can just share with you my own thoughts, right? As I said earlier, it would be very difficult for the rodeo to receive 200 million over however many years to expand the rodeo with the Spurs still playing there. And so all I can tell you is that the Spurs do not intend on playing at the Frost Center past 2032 at this point, whether that's, going back to the drawing board and figuring out some other location or a smaller amount or something else. I have no idea. I will let others speculate about what that means and whether or not the Spurs move. I have never been told anything other than that the Spurs intend on being here. But that's basically if Prop A passes and Prop B doesn't. I don't know how that works because the rodeo can't expand with the Spurs still playing there.
Jason, you're next.
I had a question, but never mind. It's all good.
Okay, I actually have a question. Because I know you just said that if this fails, it's not the end all be all. And that's something that we've also heard, that if this fails, then there is time to reconsider what we would be voting on. And so I guess like some clarification around I guess just first of all that this is the funding that's coming from the PFC. I know that's like that was the article that Jose Menendez just said that we created this PFZ and that like
Yeah.
he helped create the legislation so that we could have an opportunity like this. But that also you said that each year we have the opportunity to present a venue project to the comptroller. And so like this is the one that we presented this year. That was the resolution that passed by the commissioner's court.
No, yes. Well, and this may be on me, so I apologize. Let me clarify. Maybe I misspoke. When I said the end all be all, I meant when this passes, right? In other words, that the deal isn't done. November 4th just means that voters have given the county approval for their portion, and now there's going to be robust community conversations about what the greening actually looks like, right? The rendering is that just a rendering, right? It's a nice picture. That doesn't mean it's going to look anything like that. And so all of that stuff has to actually get done, and what is like traffic impact and the construction and all that, that's what I'm saying still needs to happen. In regards to the PFZ, and when I talked about the comptroller, so the comptroller piece is only for the visitor tax, right? It's only for the hotel, motel, and car rental. And that's only for approved projects, right? It doesn't mean that you can go each year and tell the comptroller, hey, this is now, this is tourism related, so can we get reimbursed, right? Like it has to be paid for out of the visitor tax, which has to go to approval. So I think the county only has statutorily, and I'd have to look it up, or maybe someone on the call knows, the county can only go to the ledge and ask for the venue tax, I want to say once every 2 years. And so if they want to use any more money, now again, 2% is the cap, the state cap. Bexar County is the largest county in the state that's not already at the cap. So this would increase it to that 2% and max it out. And so something else would have to give. It's kind of like an example I would give you the bond for, or sorry, the sales tax for pre-K for SA, right? The reason why pre-K for SA was able to get that money is because they maxed it out. But then once that happened for VIA and for SA Ready to Work, right? They couldn't both do it. So SA Ready to Work for 3 years out of the 5 took money from the sales tax, and the other 2 years are now going to VIA. So that would be a similar situation, right? Like there's only so much money out of the visitors tax. And so this would take it for that project. And then the projects that have gotten the money previously, many of those have already been completed. And so those aren't going to be touched. That gets asked a lot. Well, what happens to like the Tobin and all, like that money already was expended. So that money has already been allocated and spent. Does that clarify? Or did I confuse you?
I thought my understanding was that we could go every year, but I'm not sure if that was the case. So I was also kind of asking for clarification. And I see Jason like thinking. So this is also kind of like, I know Jason has experience.
I do not know the answer to that question. Sorry, I was trying to think, but I don't.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's section 334 of the local government code is the one that spells out the actual venue piece of it, the definitions, but I think it's 352 that talks about the actual like use of it. And so those are the two ones. 335, I think, is the city. So that one doesn't apply, right? Because we're talking about the county. So the county is 334. And it also spells out about the comptroller and like what's necessary to be eligible. Because what happens in reality is that the money sits like in an escrow account. Like it just sits there and the comptroller won't release it until you've been able to prove it once a year. So I think it's in February that a local government would have to provide to the comptroller, and there's like an actual document you can go look at what it looks like and show that this money that was allocated through visitor tax money, then you get reimbursed that amount.
Yeah, I guess my line of questioning was just because, like, if this is something that we can reevaluate further down the line and I feel like one of people's main concerns is, okay, we're relying on this to bring the city, jobs and to bring like more prosperity downtown and just to help our city in general by creating more tourism and giving us more sales tax, like a bigger tax base through tourism. And there have been a lot of arguments that say that creating a big sports venue isn't necessarily going to create prosperity like one to one.
Sure.
May even be like what the ratio is. Like it's not like the rate of return is even higher than like we put it in, we just get what we get. We just get it back out.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of the discussion is around, okay, we're not sure what's happened. Everyone's becoming salient about this issue in the last couple of months.
Yeah.
And if this is something that we can reevaluate, I guess like is like if the urgency is around we need to vote now, but
what other opportunities do you have to look back, right? Almost like a sunset review. So I think what I'll say to that, and I think it might be helpful, is that in the contract, the city will not release. Well, what it's actually going to happen is the city's going to have to go and take a bond out for the 489 million, right? The city will not do that, and this is in the term sheet in the contract. The city will not do that until the Spurs have come to them and said, here is the contract we have for the project, for the developers that are going to put the 500 million in for phase one out of the 1.4 billion. It's first phase 500 million, and the second phase it's 900 million. That's the 1.4 billion round. The Spurs have to come to the city before construction starts and says, here's who we have to do $500 million worth of development. That might be a mix of the Spurs. I think the Spurs actually are going to build a boutique hotel, and there's going to be mixed use and housing and all that. It has to total 500 million because the taxable value of that is what is going to be used to pay back the city's 49. So I just want to be clear. The city will not get in a position where they take a bond out and start building an arena if the Spurs haven't already gotten a commitment in writing from developers for their portion. In other words, it triggers the city doing that. The deal is dead, essentially. If the Spurs come back in a year and say, you know what, the economy is terrible. The tariffs have gotten worse. The price of materials, we can't find anybody to develop here. Then they go to the city and say, so we're not able to fulfill the 500 million. They either A, have to pay out of pocket to keep this deal moving forward, or the deal dies. The city will not release their portion until that stuff has been done. So it may not be a review for like us as voters, but our elected officials are going to have a chance to review that before making the decision of moving forward. So there are still things like off ramps that have to happen before this deal moves forward.
So your argument basically is that like we need to take this opportunity now because a year or 2 years down the road that the economy might be worse, and when we take the time to decide, then the Spurs will also take the time to decide that the economy's bad and they don't want to like agree to a new term sheet.
I guess what I would say is I think the implication, right, for certainly for me thinking about it, is that like what are the protections for us as taxpayers, right, from both the city and county if the things that are the assumptions don't pan out, right? So like if the economy or tourism is down, that's what helps pay for these things. If those don't happen, then the city gets left on the hook. I've heard that question a lot. That may not be your exact question, but I do think as a part of that, I'm just saying there are protections for us so that we're not sitting on the hook for a lot of money from the city if this deal doesn't move forward, and the deal can only move forward if those obligations have been met. So that in itself is a protection inherently for us taxpayers to know we're not moving forward unless the Spurs have committed to that. So November 4th doesn't mean automatically the 489 happens and the county's 311. There are mechanisms in place to protect us. That's why the risk is on the Spurs and not necessarily on us.
I guess like to flip that, what's the risk then to us by saying no?
Well, the risk to us is that we're stagnant, that all those things that we all agree on that need to happen, like all those things that we want to see happen, right? Homelessness and safety net programs from the city, like all those things that we believe in have to get paid for by the general fund. And these are the type of deals, right? Like, I mean, take the Spurs out of it, right? Like if this were any other big company that was coming to town, what if this was USAA, for instance, who was like, we want to build a new headquarters downtown. They come to the city and say, so we're going to do that. And here's what we're going to give you. We're going to build the headquarters, but it's actually going to be you that owns it, the city. We're going to pay for operations and maintenance. We're going to pay for any cost overruns. At the end of the day, it's an asset for the city, right? Like whether the Spurs are playing there or not, it's a $1.3 billion asset for us. And we would say like, okay, that sounds like a good deal. And that's going to spur economic development that will then increase the general fund. I think that's where a lot of people feel like, oh, well, there's a chance that this won't increase the general fund. I've never heard that. What I've heard is how much it will spur the economic impact, which will then fund the general fund. It's north of zero. And I don't say that to be funny. Like it's not doing this deal, then there's no opportunity for that growth to happen in that way. There's other type of economic development deals that happen. I mean, and I personally am not in favor of like tax abatements that we give corporations to come here for like even lower wage jobs. We've moved away from like call centers and stuff, but there are still other jobs that take place that will give like a tax abatement for 10 years that could equal millions of dollars in place, right? We're actually kind of paying them to come here and in the hope that that's going to spur some kind of economic development, but not in the amounts that we're talking about here in the billions of dollars. Like we probably haven't had a deal like this since Toyota. And so I guess your question is, well, what happens if we say no? I would just say then what else is on the table for the type of economic development that we need as a city to increase revenues so that we increase general funds? Because at the end of the day, that's what this is. It's balancing the checkbook like we all do, right? The city has a lot of money that they spend. We have more needs than we have money. And the money that we have coming in is less and less every year. Property revenue is down. Sales tax has been down. So the question is, and it's not rhetorical, like, what is the alternative? So far, what I've heard the alternative is we could spend this type of money on other projects. And again, some of those are accurate because they would increase tourism. But I don't think the city council and county believe that it would do it in such a way that it would be greater than the type of investment we're getting from the Spurs and what that will spur for our downtown.
One thing I do want to add, Andrew, is, I mean, we have been discussing Project Marvel. It's been in, the works. A lot of people are discussing different agreements, but a counter proposal would be, and we're seeing this all the way to the federal level, is a revenue sharing program that can increase tax revenue for the general fund. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it's a good point, man. Here's the number one thing I think everyone needs to understand about revenue sharing. Number one, there is no revenue to share until at least 2032. So I think the biggest difference in that is that there's no revenue until then because there's no arena until then. So naming rights and concessions don't exist until the stadium opens. And even then, the stadium would open in October, this time of 2032. We're talking about 7 years from now. And so, I mean, I disagree with the assessment that we should be looking at private businesses as revenue sharing to begin with, because I think that's problematic way to the only ones that are proven to work obviously are CPS and SAWS, and that's different. Like, we own them. Those are municipally owned. We have representation on the boards through the mayor. This is totally different. And so I think that's number one, right? Like, okay, fine, even if revenue sharing was a thing or could work, we're talking about 7+ years in the future that we would even get a dime. Number two, a lot of the revenue sharing that I hear, number one, it's not the NBA, because the NBA doesn't have any city that does it. The examples we've been given are from other sports leagues. Baseball is the big one that comes to mind for Tampa. Is it Tampa Bay or San Diego?
And I think the Green Bay Packers also have a.
Well, yeah, but the Green Bay Packers one is like everyone with the holy grail, because like you can own it as, right. Like that would be awesome. But I'm saying in the NBA though, that's just not a part of the deal. For the NBA as a league, every dollar that every team makes, 50% goes back to the league, because they actually share. They have a revenue sharing model within the league. So like the top teams like New York, LA, Chicago, Miami, those kind of cities that are at the top of the spectrum, actually revenue from them comes back to the smaller market teams like the Spurs. So anyway, that all being said, the type of revenue sharing I've heard most common are naming rights and concessions. Naming rights, I think the top naming rights are like $10 million, right, a year. So even if you were talking about 10% of that, that's $1 million a year from naming rights, right? The Spurs in the community benefits agreement are already giving more than double that in the 2.5 million. And what I would say is the 75 million is revenue. It's not coming from Peter Holt's like personal bank. Like, it's coming from the Spurs as an organization through revenue. It's just spread out over time, right? 2.5 million a year. But even then, if you want to say, I would argue 2.5 million of revenue sharing to the city already. So that's more than you would likely get from the top tier of revenue sharing, which is naming rights. Concessions is even less. And so I would just say, again, that money wouldn't even come to us until 7 or 8 years from now. It's less money than we would be getting right now, the 2.5 million already. And I just think it's dangerous to be, as a city, trying to budget, which we do for 2 years, right? We have to balance that budget, that we do it in a way where we don't know what that money is. And I can tell you with certainty, because that's what we do with CPS right now. 14% of every dollar, we know we're going to make a revenue off of that. And it's a large portion of our budget, but it's very difficult to forecast what that's going to look like every year. And so it is difficult. So that would be my response to revenue sharing.
Go for it, Jordan.
Cool. I might have a thing or two on stock shows, Andrew, but I think you got the upper hand on just kind of the city government and how all this stuff works. So I appreciate the insight.
Thank you.
So like I mentioned, I'm newish to San Antonio. I moved here in 2022, but I guess so I've been talking to my neighbors and talking to folks around here, and the most common thing I hear from San Antonians so far is we already built the Alamo Dome and they outgrew it. We already built Freeman and they outgrew it. Why can't they just work with what they have? I put in our young Dem group the other day. My neighbor's like, I've lived in this house for 30 years and the city still doesn't put sidewalks outside my front.
Yeah.
And so I guess this is, if we're from a more spiritual philosophical perspective of
Uh-huh.
the idea of using public funds for resources that are not broadly publicly available. I was thinking, what does it cost for a Spurs ticket?
Yeah.
And for most people, it's a thing they have to really, really plan for. If we're thinking about the cost of season tickets, that's unreasonably expensive. I was Googling, it's like 1,500 plus bucks. And I was like, is this for one seat or a group of them? No, that's for one freaking seat. And
Mm-hmm.
so I guess my question and my thought, and as we're going through this, is are we doing the most good for the most people in making this commitment. I understand the argument and perspective of you got to spend money to make money. I get it. I bought this for a reason. But on the flip side, if we're creating a resource that is out of reach for most San Antonians, at least in this neighborhood, in the neighborhood that is immediately impacted, and then who is who is genuinely benefiting from that investment as opposed to who is able to access that investment? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's a super fair point. So let me answer the cost first. Um, and I know it doesn't always feel like it, right? But right now, if you were to go online and look for tickets, and I did this a few days ago, but like for the first home game, there are tickets that are under $25 and many that are under $12. The Spurs actually are in the top 1% of all the 30 NBA teams for affordability. And so no, like, yes, I'm not going to sit here and be like, you can get a great, like, take seat up close for $25, but like you can get in to see a game. And they're going to continue that, right? I believe the number is somewhere close to 2,000 tickets on average that are under $25 for a ticket, even now in the Wimby era, which is pretty remarkable. Number two, like, who benefits? And so let me just go back to that first point about like built the Alamo Dome, built the Frost Center. Um, I wasn't alive at that point. But when the Spurs moved out of the hemisphere in the 90s, that place was falling apart. They needed to find a new place or upgrade it. At the time, then Mayor Henry Cisneros and the leadership business community were trying to get an NFL team here, and they gambled and said, we're going to build a football stadium, and we can kill two birds with one stone and have the Spurs play there. So the Spurs agreed, kind of as a temporary thing. And none of you might be old enough to remember, but you know, if you went to a game there, it was an NFL arena, right, stadium with a giant curtain down the middle. It was never an NBA arena, right? And so, sorry, Nicolette, kill two problems at once. And so the Spurs said, look, we have to get out of here. And at the same time, I believe the NBA was starting to modernize their standards for arenas and to standardize them. And so they were like, yeah, this doesn't work. We have to figure something out. At that point, the Spurs were owned by local companies, mostly like the USAA, AT&T at the time. And so it was thought, we need to move them like to the north side was the ideal spot. They ended up going to the east side because the then county manager, Cindy Cryer, said, hey, we could really use the Spurs in a new arena on the east side to help the then fledgling rodeo. Thus how the rodeo and the Spurs became roommates in the first place. I just say all this because, as you heard me earlier say, I think this time the city manager and Mayor Nuremberg went to the Spurs and asked them to come play in Hemisphere to help with Project Marvel. In every one of those cases since the Spurs have been here, local leadership, elected leadership have asked the Spurs. Now, and I'm not trying to convince you that, you know, poor Spurs and this. I just want to make clear like what the intentions were, that they have been a good community partner and said like we will do what's best for this community, right? And if it meant playing in the Alamo Dome for a few years, and if it meant trying to help the rodeo for 25 years, they were two very different companies then. They've now outgrown each other in that place. And so here we are again. The Spurs are looking to play in another facility. This one will now be 30 years by the time they leave there. And just in terms of modernization and standards, they would need to do significant in the billions of upgrades anyway. And it just doesn't make sense. And so that's what I would say to those. And again, it might not be a good answer or sufficient for some, but it is the reality. This is not just the Spurs saying, hey, we want to move every time and we're going to go here, we're going to go there. Even this time, they're saying, hey, we hear you. This is mutually beneficial. We're going to go where it makes the most sense for the city and the county.
Jason, do you not have a question anymore?
I'm gonna let Nicolette go.
Okay, you're up, Nicolette.
I actually wasn't gonna have a question because we're already at 8:30, y'all, and I know probably y'all are also very tired, but I know I think Andrew was only supposed to have 30 minutes, or was it just we just keep talking? Kind of, or no?
I had given him the 30 minutes to present, but then I mean, this like next hour was basically for like questions and for debate. Yeah, I was gonna hold the Zoom open until 9. So basically, like if people had questions, I mean, this is a good forum for us to continue
Yeah, I'm
to
also
ask detailed
available
questions.
on one-on-ones, and so if you guys, I know Liz has my contact info, but and a lot of you know me, so if you want to just meet up or have a call or something like that, I'm happy to. I know that it's been a long day for y'all as well.
Andrew, the 21st at 6:30, Stonewall. I need somebody out there to present the Side.
All right.
So if you're available,
put it in the calendar. I will make sure we get back to you about who will be there, but yeah, someone will be there.
Okay, I'll text you. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'm just like, I think from my end, like just providing more of a counterpoint as opposed to questions. As someone who lives right like in front of the Alamo Dome and like got to watch the Spurs play in the Alamo Dome, I've kind of seen like the different changes happen downtown. And independent of what city does, we have had projects like the Pearl, for example, that property taxes, city taxes probably didn't pay for those projects, but they indirectly were. They rose. Property taxes went up with all the development that has went up downtown, and I do think that this project, Project Marvel, particularly, is going to increase property taxes on people of color, marginalized communities, poor communities, and I know that we have someone in here that was able to get into Denver Heights probably a few years ago. I think with this project, the investments that are going to be made into the housing is not going to be made by like individuals, like just everyday people who are trying to make a purchase on a mortgage. It's going to be the banks. It's going to be special interest groups buying 10 to 20 houses and artificially, in tandem with Project Marvel, increase property taxes and just move swaths of working people that I was raised with, and I'm already seeing so many people displaced. But this is going to be that on steroids, and so that's just the moral argument. But I think that since we aren't like, I'm not an economic advisor. I'm in this organization because I'm a Democrat and specifically a young Democrat. I do think that when we're seeing elections like in New York with Zoran Mamdani, and we're seeing progressives rally the populace and the masses around economic affordability and just making sure that people and working people are the priority of government, I do think that this is an opportunity for Bear Dems to make that argument. For us to say, and I really do need to make this point, like if you do like Mamdani and you think that his main agenda was working with the New York Mets to build out and develop more of New York, that was not his platform. I do think that as Democrats, we have an opportunity to really, really hone in on messages that are going to resonate and do give us more legitimacy outside of San Antonio, so that people can say, you know what, the Democratic Party is standing for working people. It's standing to increase the standard of living for young people. It's trying to expand opportunity via public infrastructure like transportation, public education, public housing. I think that's where we are, or that's where we should be as Democrats. I'm not saying that no one should have like counter opinions about, right? I mean, we have a Big Ten party, and many times government and the business community have to work together to solve problems. So I think with Project Marvel, I'm firmly against it, but I'm not trying to say like, well, if you're for it, no, I'm just saying we really need to look at this as a question of values and say, do we want government to work in the interest of working people, or do profits and private interests take center stage and priority in this election on November 4th? So that's just my perspective. And
look, I appreciate it, man. Look, I don't disagree with anything you said, other than that this money is not coming from those public coffers. that could pay for any of those things that you're saying. I'm saying, and it's not through trickle down, I'm just saying that the economic impact here will go towards the general fund ultimately that can increase those. Now, in terms of the displacement and all that, like I get it. I would love if this council could get together and do something like Austin and look at zoning laws changes and trying to figure out because yeah, you're not going to get a counter argument from me about like BlackRock coming in and purchasing, massive swaths of cities like will happen potentially here for this. But I'm just saying this is not taking money away from any other projects that go to those things that you're talking about, but it gives us a leg up by saying we're going to have mostly tourists pay for these economic drivers that can then go towards helping those other things out. Because absent that, I still have not heard, and I'm not just saying from this group, I'm saying in general, and I've worked for city council for a long time. I have never heard of a project of this scale to be discussed or considered at the city or county level that has the potential for this type of development. And like I said earlier, and I'm not saying this to be funny, whether it's 16 billion or 19 billion or 15 billion or even 10 billion, the point is it's north of zero. And without this, we're status quo. And yes, I'm not saying there will be no economic development, but it's going to be the type of economic development that we're doing now that has us, given the economy and other constraints, that have us looking at a $250 million deficit by 2030. I agree with the mayor. We have a spending problem at City Hall. The difference is that I haven't heard anybody say, well, how do we bring more money in besides revenue sharing, which is going to be a penny in a drop in the bucket, like real economic development that I feel like we're lucky to even be considering. And there are going to be some other issues, but like that's the job of city council to figure that stuff out, right? Like we have to have leadership who's going to stand up for that, but it doesn't mean it should come at the cost of status quo and doing the same, because we know that's where that's going to get us. It's only going to make things worse.
I'm just gonna say one quick thing, and then I know, like, yeah, it's probably getting pretty late, but first of all, thanks, Andrew, for being here. I really appreciate it and giving us so much of your time,
For sure.
because I know it's late for you as well. Um, I think just I want to give really quickly my thought on just what I've heard in the last couple, like, kind of comments, which is that, you know, we have a lot of issues in San Antonio. We have issues with people buying up homes and turning them into homes that are far less affordable than they were before, pushing people out. But I'm saying that's happening right now, right? And that's going to happen whether we build this or don't build this. Or folks who haven't had a sidewalk built in front of their home in years and years and years. That is a real issue that we need to address. I guess my kind of reason why I feel like I need to support this is I'm trying to understand how we actually go and address that, right? And what I've heard Andrew say, what I've heard kind of from this proposition is this is going to spur, development. We're going to have a lot of money coming into the general fund from, ground leases in Hemisphere, from a 4x increase in the rent that's coming in from the spurs from other sources. Um, and it sounds to me like those are funds that can be used like by the city to do things that we want it to do. And without that, I don't see where we get that level of funding, that level of money coming at tax revenues coming into the city. And so I guess to me, that's like the reason why I'm supporting this is kind of for the same reasons you're talking about, Sam. It's almost funny, like everything you said I agree with. And I'm like, those are all the reasons why I think this is important, because my understanding is this bringing in jobs, and my understanding is this investing in a city that has been like so far behind in terms of being invested in compared to like Houston or Dallas or something. And so that's the reason why I think this is a good idea, is simply because of everything that you've said. So I mean, that's where I'm at. But I know some people on this call are, myself included, are like have opinions on this already. But I just want to thank everybody for being here so late and talking about it all. So.